This is it. We're building our janky 2-thruster flying machine. But it's not going to be without some difficulties along the way. One thing I really need to do before it causes me a major issue is to fix this hole left behind by the asteroid. It's right in my way for connecting to the base, getting over to the drill rig, and all that. So what I'll do is use my hand drill to carve down the raised bump so it lays more naturally with the terrain, then fill in the hole with some unfinished light armor blocks. Alright, that's way better. It's still not perfect, but it'll do. Now I think it's time to start building the platform for my rocket. I'll start by tapping into the floor conveyors I laid last time, and then run a short line of conveyors outside where I'll make the construction platform. Now, I called it a rocket because you can hardly call it a ship. It'll have some ship-like qualities, but it's more akin to me strapping myself to a missile that has some basic guidance with gyroscopes. For the platform, it'll serve two purposes. One is that it'll provide me a dedicated and level place to build the rocket, and the means to fill it with hydrogen. The other is that I want to try to simulate as much as possible the landing pad area I'll likely encounter on the space station. I have no idea what the connector and landing pads look like up there, but this may help me resolve any issues. Remember that I have no jetpack, so if I disengage with the helm and I'm just out of its reach, it's not going to end well. I'm pretty sure there's artificial gravity on the stations, which will help, but there's just so many unknowns until we get there. These meteors just keep threatening our demise. For this series though, I'm liking the feel of having a random and potentially devastating event looming everywhere I go. I also like the storms, and sometimes I'm at just the right place to make it feel like a tornado is just about ready to top over the next ridge. For me, all these environmental dangers make the world seem real and add to the experience. All this time I've been building and stuff. I'm also occasionally going after satellites. It's a way for me to get parts, but more importantly, money for the trading at the trade station. And it helps generate more of the assert bases. I found another one near the edge of a bluff that should let me get close enough to either dig or take it with my pistol. Also, I'd like to know in the comments if, in a challenge like this one, is it cheating to use the third-person camera to go over and around things? I know it's pretty controversial in some games, but is it okay here? I'd like to hear your thoughts. But let's finish taking the base and get on to the next step. Okay, 3 interior turrets, several magazines, and a few deaths later, the base is ours. Time to get the Rover. Now this assert base was pretty high up on a plateau, so it may take a little searching to find a way up. But I have found that for the most part, you can find an accessible path by Rover, and this Rover seems to have some very good climbing properties. I tried this one path, but another storm seems to be moving in. What's cool here is that I seem to have found one of these dark green areas with ice fairly high up in this plateau region. Unusual maybe, but it would be a very cool base location. The search for a way up continued, and I even did some surveillance over hilltops on foot, and wound up finding another smaller green patch. So, my conclusion for Pertam is that ice is certainly not common. But if you can get to an area of the canyons and search around a while, you will find some eventually. That was the 4th ice area I found ever since I've been on the planet, which isn't a lot considering all the roving around I've done, but I've also only covered a fraction of the whole planet. I did eventually find the base as another storm rolled in, but it was time to get down to business and get this thing scrapped. One difficulty here was that the assert base was at a very high altitude, so there was no oxygen. I've tried playing as much as possible with my helmet open, and have intentionally avoided carrying any oxygen bottles, because I felt that would too easily circumvent the planet's challenge of low oxygen at elevation. There's no hard rule against carrying oxygen, but here, in this storm, on the plateau, I needed scrapping time. And so even though I didn't have an oxygen bottle, I closed my helmet to give me the best chance. Even if it did mean crushing the dead engineer's body under the weight of the roof. Alright, the scrapping was complete, and I was nearing 50% oxygen, so time to get down. But there was a problem with the Rover. The wheels didn't seem to want to go forward when turning. It was like the rear wheel was bound up, yet it wasn't. After messing around with settings that didn't help, I had to get going. Time was not on my side with oxygen, and I was now at 40%, still on the plateau, and couldn't find my way back down. I found a reasonable way back down, but got careless. The Rover picked up too much speed going down the hill, caught some air, and wiped out. I think what may have happened is when the rear of the Rover landed, the suspension compressed and the tail hit the ground, which broke off the wheel and the whole thing spun to an abrupt end. It wasn't that bad though, and I'm very proud of how the Rover handled its first wipeout. A bunch of things didn't explode, it stayed upright, and it was a pretty simple matter of jacking up the Rover with the built-in jack, and I always think of Speed Racer in the Mach 5 when I use the lift, and reattach the wheel with a couple repairs. Once back at the base, I made a few more upgrades to the Rover, even with the meteors continuing to pound the landscape all around the base. I finished the solar panel and added an oxygen tank after my experience on the plateau running low on O2. This would let me do whatever operations I needed to do in higher altitudes, but do it without the hyper-easy method of carrying oxygen bottles. This was just a slightly more engineered way. I also added back the ore detector that I'd removed a long time ago. Every rover should have an ore detector. Oh, there's another meteor hole. Back to the platform, I might need to expand it. I probably will, but it was time to get the first piece of actual ship built and drop the starting connector. Just let me nudge that over. Fortunately, connectors do not require power to lock, so with that locked in place and stable, next was to build up the platform. From what I've seen on most space stations, the horizontal connector is pretty even with the surrounding platform, and they have blocks that slope in and allow room for a protruding connector on the ship to easily fit. Next bit was a hydrogen tank, though I think I'll probably build two just in case, and then a conveyor junction to attach my two hydrogen thrusters. I do love Pertam, and the storms, and the whole feel of this planet. When it's like this, it just feels like I've built a small survival outpost on some alien planet. It's so good. Even with the storm though, I have to get on with the build. And for control, I'm going with the stand-up helm, like I have on the Rover. This was the lightest weight block to control the ship that still felt like an actual control. I added the second hydrogen tank, I couldn't afford to run out of fuel on this excursion, and added the all-important gyroscope. That was most of the basics, but now it was time for some security measures. A remote control block on the ship would allow me to control the thing if I ever got separated from it in space. Keep in mind, I have no jetpack, so being just a few feet from the helm control and just out of reach from its interaction could be devastating for our survival. A simple remote control block might allow me to take control of the ship and nudge it towards me in a saving move. After turning the remote control block the right way round and replacing it, it was the placement of an antenna to be able to communicate with the remote control, and an event controller. The event controller turned out to be a bust. My idea was to create a kind of dead man switch, so if I accidentally detached from the ship while zipping through space, and to conserve fuel I would be flying with inertial dampeners off, the event controller could do something to kick the dampeners back on and stop the ship. I'll cut the couple hours of testing short for you, and basically say that the remote control block didn't seem to have the functionality through the event controller to do the trick. And a set of AI blocks for both basic tasks and flight wouldn't work either, because I had only 2 thrusters, and the AI blocks give an error to function unless you have a thruster in every direction. So I just have to be cautious and not fat finger the F key or something while in flight. Next were 2 small batteries. I figured 2 would be enough to run the electronics and keep my suit charged for a few hours. I finished up the thruster assembly, and I'm glad I took a break to go fetch another satellite, and maybe get some more money, because watching the satellite fall reminded me of another item I'd put on my to-do list, and that was to add a couple parachutes to this thing, because they might save me during re-entry. If I bought much of anything at the trade station, I might be too heavy for a proper landing with just 1 small thruster. Okay, the parachutes were on board, sort of near the center of gravity. Just one last addition, and that was a medium cargo container. I could probably fit anything I need in the connector, but I might get lucky and want a little more storage. I did a medium connector rather than a few small ones because the passage from the connector through the hydrogen tanks and into the medium cargo container was all the larger small grid opening size, which is the only way to pass most components through the grid. Like metal grids won't go through the small openings. The last thing to do is drill and process a little more ice for hydrogen and see if this ship actually flies, or if it kills us. Tune into the next episode to find out what happens, and I'll see you then.